Hi, my name is Stella Ihenacho and I'm the Agile Faculty Lead and also the Scrum Master Coach at Enster Technologies. Today, I want to talk about a quick how to prepare effectively and efficiently for sprint reviews. Now, if you don't know what sprint reviews are, sprint review is one of the Scrum ceremonies that's also time boxed, where the team come together to showcase what their sprint accomplishments are. They can do a recorded demonstration, or they can do a live demonstration of the work that they've done within the sprint to stakeholders, right? With the purpose of showcasing what they've done during the sprint, but also getting feedback that would help them plan better for the upcoming sprint, or get some feedback from end users that will help them, build better products or build better services. So today's video is really about then how do I prepare for sprint review? And the use case is, for example, if you are a new Scrum Master within a company or within an organization and they've never done sprint review before, then just watch through this video and you will have a very good idea of how you can take ownership of the sprint review. Or if you're already a Scrum Master who you work within an organization and they already do sprint reviews and you feel like things can be better, don't hesitate to put your comment under this video. I'll be able to answer those questions, but also listen, because I'm sure I'm going to touch something that you can do better. Now, for sprint reviews, the first thing you want to do is you want to identify who the stakeholders are. Oftentimes, when sprint reviews are done, if we're not careful, the teams begin to talk about what they're doing, which is great, but they begin to speak either really technical conversations, or they go into the weeds and into the details of the work that they've done in the sprint. Now, in as much as that is a good thing, that might not be the best place for them to do that, because not everybody on the call might be technically savvy to really understand the depth of what they're saying. So for the first thing you want to do is, who are the stakeholders for the sprint review? Are they business people? Are they project managers? Are they product owners? Are they product managers? Are they end users, right? Are they technical people? Are they managers? Why do you need to identify who the stakeholders are? So that you don't lose them, right? If the purpose of the sprint review is to showcase what your team has done, if your team come and speak technical language all through from the beginning of the review to the end of the review, guess what? The customer value has been lost, because the end user who only cares about how that helps them, what the value is of what your team has done for that sprint, they don't get to understand or experience that. So you want to identify who the audience is. Who are the audience? Who is my audience for the sprint review? Who will be attending this call? Are they internal stakeholders and external stakeholders? And even if they're internal stakeholders, what kind of internal stakeholders are they? Why is this super crucial and super important? Because you need to know who you're speaking to, and you need to also guide your team in how they communicate the value at which they have delivered at the end of the sprint. That is super crucial, right? Because we want people on the call to be able to ask questions. We want them to give us feedback. We want them to understand the value, right? The customer value. We want them to understand the increment. Not that it's just a piece of software, not that it's just a piece of code, but what is that code doing? What is that code going to lead to for the user at the end of the day? What is the value behind that code that has been written, or that increment that has been delivered at the end of the sprint, right? And so identifying your stakeholders, identifying your audience is super important. And so when you identify your stakeholders and your audience, and in that way, the first thing you also want to do is send out a meeting invite, right? You want to figure out the time zone that you're in and look for a time zone that works best for as majority of the people as you can get, and send out the meeting invite. Ensure that their calendars are free within that period, and then also even within the meeting invite, you want to write like an agenda. What is the purpose of this event? You're going with the assumption that not everybody knows what a sprint review is. And so you want to put, what's the agenda? At the end of the day, what is the input? What is the output of the sprint review call, right? And then maybe have a list of the teams that will be doing demos. So you want to do that. And because the sprint review should be happening at the end of every sprint, so you can have your meeting to reoccur. So you don't have to keep creating all the time. If you have a schedule of your sprint, if it's a 2-week sprint, then at that point in time, you can really trace, well, at the end of the sprint, most of the teams or all of the teams should have something that they want to demo, right? Or they want to showcase. So your meeting can be scheduled at a particular time that fits majority of your audience. And with that meeting invite, ensure that you have an agenda and an objective so that anybody who is joining the call, they know what the purpose of that call is, but they also know who is going to be demoing or showing the review, right? So that is that. And also the second thing I want to talk about is logistics. I've briefly talked about it. I talked about scheduling. I talked about identifying your audience and figuring out the best time spots, right, to put your meeting calls as well. Another important thing regarding logistics when you're preparing for sprint review is the presentation, right? The presentation. Who is presenting? One of the pitfalls of sprint review is when people join the call and it's all over the place. They don't know who's presenting. They don't know who's speaking. Their demos are not playing. The sound is bad. There's a lot of background noise. So as a Scrum Master, this is where you step up to the plate to ensure that the sprint review moves as smoothly as possible, right? And so who is presenting? If you're working within a team, multiple Scrum teams, collaborate with the other Scrum Masters to say, well, who's presenting in your team? Who's presenting in your team? And in what order of cadence or what order of sequence do we want to do the presentation? Who wants to go first? And how many minutes? Who wants to go first and how many minutes? You even first of all need to know how many minutes each team is going to present to have a good idea of how long your sprint review it's going to be for, right? Some teams, some companies have multiple teams and they probably give 15 minutes per team. Some companies divide their sprint review. If they have a lot of teams that are doing sprint reviews at the same time or within the same day, they usually will have some, earlier in the day and have some later in the day to have a gap in between. So these are the kind of conversation you want to have with other Scrum Masters or your managers to say, well, we do have quite a lot of teams. And if we put all of these teams to have sprint review at the same time and our sprint reviews are going for 3 hours, 4 hours, guess what? You are losing people. Right? People are going to be zoning out. They're going to be exhausted. They're going to be tired. They're not going to wait till the end of the sprint review to know who is presenting at the last person. The last people are probably going to get the breadcrumbs of people left on the call. How about we divide it? Maybe we have a morning session and we have an afternoon session to give people break in between to rejuvenate and do other things they want to do. So all of this falls under logistics, but you need to understand the layout of the company and the organization that you're a part of to be able to have this conversation with your manager or with the right persons, right? And so I talked about presentation. How is the presentation going to flow? Well, who is going to welcome people? Like, welcome everyone to sprint 100. And today we have all of these teams that are going to be presenting. And first off, I am going to welcome Team Stone Crushers to do their presentation. And the person representing Team Stone Crushers will come on and probably share their PowerPoint slide, talk about what the teams have done, and hand it off. So what is the handoff process, right? You want to reduce any awkward silence or dead air or nobody saying anything. So what is that handoff process? And if you need to do a dry run or a sprint review preparation before the main sprint review, by all means do it. Preparation makes better. So if you want to prepare with your team or other teams, by all means go for it. But it's super crucial that the presentation is as smooth as possible, that the presenters are prepared, right? The presenters are prepared. They're engaging. How they speak is engaging to the audience, right? The slides are professionally done. The sound is clear, that people know that while you're joining the call, please go off of mute if you're not speaking. Right? People know that you don't have to just shout your opinions or your feedback. That if you have anything to say, for example, if you're using maybe Google Meet or you're using Zoom, you can use the raise your hand feature, or you can put your question in the chat, and when the person is done presenting, they can look at the questions and answer those questions, right? And so that's where you come in place as a Scrum Master to make sure all of these best practices, right? Presentation best practices, even participant best practices are being adhered to. They might make mistakes in the beginning, but when you keep, reminding them and explaining to them the importance of this, guess what? It becomes a culture for them. Now, the last but not the least, feedback. Another crucial part of sprint review is getting feedback. we're not just coming to tell people what we've done, but we want to get feedback from the stakeholders. We want to get feedback from the audience, the end users. So there should always be room for feedback during your sprint review. And if you ask, well, so how do I get feedback? Well, you can get feedback this way. At the end of the sprint review, when the sprint review is done, maybe a particular team are done with their sprint review, you want to say, well, does anybody have feedback for me? Or does anybody have feedback for the team, right? And so you take a moment to pause, to get people thinking about what they've just seen, to get people understanding the value of what they've just seen. And then they begin to ask questions. They begin to get ask clarifying questions or say, well, I thought this would work that way, but it's not working that way. Why was this done this way? Why is this feedback so important? One of the output of sprint review is that when you get the feedback, it's an input to sprint planning, right? And so the team will take that feedback back to their sprint planning. So when they're planning for the next sprint, they have that feedback, because again, it's all about increments, right? But iteratively, and we're doing things better. We're getting more information, and we're thinking about quality, and we've showcased our work to the end users or to stakeholders, and now they've seen it and they've given us feedback. So let's take that feedback back into the team and see, can we implement this? Can we change something? Is it something that we can work on? Is something that requires further conversation, right? And so that feedback is important. So there are multiple ways you can do feedback. You can do feedback at the end of each team presentation. Give some couple of minutes for people to ask questions. You can encourage people before the sprint review even starts. Put your questions in the chat. When the team is done presenting, they will get your questions in the chat. Or at the end of the whole sprint review, because some people might have feedback or questions and they might not want to say it on the call. Encourage people to reach out to that team and say, if you have any questions or any recommendations, please feel free to reach out to somebody from that team and speak to them. And another one is you can have a document, a sprint review feedback document. If people don't want to ask questions, if they don't want to reach out, guess what? They can type it. So they can type and say, well, for this team, I have these questions regarding what you just showcased. And so that can be a living document where people are putting their feedback, but the team is also responding and answering questions that are being put on that feedback, right? So feedback is super, super crucial. Well, I really hope that this video has given you a lot of things to talk about or think about as well, and also talk about within your team. Because sprint review, if done well, is amazing. It happens at the end of the sprint, and I like to tell most teams, which is, you don't have to have something to demo before you do sprint review. You have worked on something during your sprint review. You had a sprint, you had a sprint goal before the sprint, right? And so there must be something that the team has done throughout the course of the sprint, be it a 1 week sprint, 2 or 3 or 4 week sprint. So talk about it during the sprint review. Let people know what you've worked about. Let people cheer you on. Let them buy into the value that your team is working on. But for them to buy into the value, you have to show them something. You have to step up as a team to say, hey, in this sprint, we worked on these bugs, and the value of these bugs to the end user, or the value of these bugs to our stakeholders is XYZ. Maybe better quality, right? Maybe more security, maybe more accessibility, whatever it is. Explain the value of the work you've done during the course of the sprint. And as a Scrum Master, there are so many ways you can help make your sprint review efficient, just amazing, very effective, very collaborative, and just very engaging as well. And I hope with this point of mine, I've been able to convince you about how to truly, truly look at your sprint review process and think about ways to make it more engaging and more efficient. Thank you for listening to me. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat.